Can I gain strength while cutting? I don't know. Can you? What's up, guys? It is Dr. Seth back with another round of answering your questions from my Instagram AMA, sponsored again by my own coaching and consultation services. So hit those links below, but let's get into it. So my opinion on strength gain or even strength maintenance during a cut has changed with the cut that I am recently doing, because this is the first time in my entire lifting career where I have lost a significant amount of weight and I haven't gotten significantly weaker and shriveled up into a little pathetic sack of skin and bones. And I think the biggest difference in this cut going better, number one, is I'm not just going full idiot crash diet. Number two is my mental state around the cut and working to get more okay with being hungry. Because before, I would feel hungry, I'd feel physically low going into training, and that would immediately send me into a panic spiral where I'd go, oh no, I'm hungry, I'm gonna feel so weak, and then I end up talking myself into feeling weak. What I'm doing this time around is I'm just being like, yeah, I'm hungry, not associating meaning to it, and then just going and training as hard as I can with what I've got. And I have been very surprised that squats, conventional deadlifts, bench is holding on very, very, very strong. Now, other lifts I'm doing, my overhead press, my sumo deadlift, those are two lifts that I haven't really pushed before. And because I haven't really pushed before, there is a lot of room to make up, which means that because there's a lot of room to make up, I'm actually able to make up that room while in a significant calorie deficit, which is something that I never would have expected. Now, with that said, if you are trying to gain strength during a cut, what is going to help you is if you're cutting relatively slow so that you're not being too aggressive and you're not just totally depleting the crap out of yourself. The other thing is if you are a newer lifter, you're going to have an easier time making gains during a cut because it's easier for newer lifters to make up ground than it is for very advanced lifters. And the last thing that I touched on already is your mental state during the cut. If you just go in and do your best with what you got, not panic, not get freaked out by hunger, not just turn being hungry into a reason to slack off, you're going to be able to do better. So yeah, it is possible to gain strength on a cut, but I also wouldn't be worried about trying to gain strength on a cut, because during a cut, I think the biggest priority should be just on cutting well. And if we sacrifice cutting well for trying to make or hold on to strength, we're not really going to get the point of the cut. So if you do get strength gains, sick, awesome. If you don't, just focus on cutting, because once you have food back in, you should be able to make up ground as long as your training is productive during that weight cut. Hip thrusts as an accessory to deadlift and squat. Which is more important, single legs or both legs, please? Man, oh man, I don't even know where to start with this one, but I think the best place to start is going to be saying that I have seen so many people develop gigantic hip thrusts, like 600, 700, 800 pound hip thrusts, and then still have a very not good deadlift. And I think the biggest thing that I'm trying to get at is I don't think hip thrust strength is very important for being able to squat and deadlift well, because some of the biggest squatters I know, some of the biggest deadlifters I know, don't have very big hip thrusts and have never really trained hip thrusts. And I just don't think that the hip extension created by hip thrust, like, yes, it is a hard glute contraction, but I think we're thinking about hip thrust where the goal is to just push hips forward versus a squat or deadlift where the goal is to be able to get the upper body through on top of the hips. I don't know if it's like that being different biomechanically. I don't know if it's just the strength curve being so different. I just don't see huge carryover from people getting better at hip thrusts to squats and deadlifts. And I think that if you want to get better at squats and deadlifts, there are much better ways to train your glutes. One of them being like the Pete Ruber style back raise if we are trying to make it glute emphasis. Another being a GHR back raise trying to make it glute emphasis, just back raises trying to make it glute emphasis, stiff legs, narrow good mornings, narrow squats where we're trying to get some hip to come through. Like, there's a lot of ways where we can train glutes better for powerlifting carryover than a hip thrust. But if we're going back to the just trying to grow ass cheeks, a hip thrust is probably going to be good for that. But it's like, is it just going to carry over to strength? I am not sold on it. And I don't think they're going to be the most productive way to spend your glute training time for the majority of powerlifters. Bicep tear rehab. Now, Assuming that this was a surgical grade tear, the first thing I'm going to say is listen to your surgeon's post-surgical guidelines, because we don't want to go doing something silly and accidentally rip that sucker off again. The second thing I'm going to say is I'm not going to get too far into specifics, because I don't want someone hearing what I'm saying, listening to it instead of listening to their surgeon's post-surgical rehab, and then ripping the thing off again, because if we had something surgically reattached, our number one goal is not ripping that off. Now, in my experience, we can be a little bit more aggressive than people would assume, but again, I want people to err on the side of safety. And with biceps post-surgical rehab, it usually is pretty simple, and it's just a matter of introducing a little bit of contraction of the bicep, a little bit of elbow range as the person is able to tolerate it, and then building up over time. I usually like to start with low-grade isometrics while they are still in the sling or brace, just lightly contracting the bicep, not enough to move the elbow, just enough to feel tension, lightly contracting the tricep, going back and forward with that for isometrics. Once that is tolerable and once they're able to access some range, we just expand the range they're doing the isometrics in, and then eventually progress towards just doing extensions and curls with nothing in their hand. Once that's tolerable, then we start looking at adding load, and then we start looking at adding length through the shoulder, and we just build things up until they're able to tolerate normal training once again. Is doing soft tissue work like stretching, trigger ball, needling, massage overrated for recovery? So I'm trying to think of the best way to answer this question, because answering it well is kind of a big one, and that has to do with the average athlete, average lifter, average clinician even has a very misunderstood idea of what actually creates recovery. So recovery is simply going to come from resting adequately, being relaxed adequately, and then having the fuel, the nutrition, the hydration to allow things to then recover and rebuild. All of the things where athletes are getting like pushed on, prodded, stabbed with needles, etc., 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 it's not really changing the structural state. It's not really changing the physical readiness of an athlete or of a body part. It is changing how the brain perceives readiness and the brain perceives the body part. Now, that change in perception can then have an increase in performance, but I don't think that that is what should be prioritized, and I think that it is often over-prioritized over more active means. Now, the whole idea of active recovery is kind of a farce too, because doing work is going to elicit a degree of recovery rebuilding demand. But if we think about massage or tissue work or anything of that sort, we're artificially pushing on a muscle, we're artificially stimulating a mechanoreceptor externally. That external stimulus then influences the brain's perception. I would then want to question, can we have a similar degree of mechanoreceptor stimulation with internal drive to the area to create that mechanoreceptor stimulation? And to put that in less nerdy terms, if we have a stiff or sore body part, what I'd rather have someone do compared to getting it massaged, getting it foam rolled, getting it needled, whatever, I would rather have them take that muscle and have a low grade of contraction through that full range of motion to then show the brain that the muscle is safe to move for that range of motion, regain control through that range of motion, and then by doing that, we should be then more ready to go without needing to go get a massage or get tissue work done. Now, I'm not saying that massage, tissue work, etc. has no value. It absolutely can have value in changing how we perceive an area, but I would just rather see lifters place more emphasis on doing things for themselves rather than getting things done to them by other people. And again, like, I'm not trying to say that it's not worth getting massages. It's just that I think that people place too much priority on the, I need to go get this part pushed on, rather than, can I change training stimulus to then get the adaptation that I want to see? And then on top of that, that's still not actually creating recovery. We need to make sure that we're rested and hydrated and relaxed enough to actually be recovered for the next training session. As soon as I started powerlifting, my bench press max went down 15 kilos. Why? Well, you're probably doing something at least a little bit wrong. I think there's two places that this could likely be coming from. The first place being that going from just training like a gym bro to going towards training like a powerlifter, the difference between most gym bros training and powerlifter training is that if we are going to be a powerlifter, we need to hold certain standards on all of the lifts. So if you were a gym bro whose ass is coming off the bench, you're bouncing benches off your rib cage, if we stop having our ass come off the bench, we actually pause our benches instead of just catapulting them off of a rib cage trampoline, that is going to make the bench press a much harder movement, and it would be reasonable to then reduce the amount of weight that you can press because you've made the bench a way harder movement. The other side of things that is less likely, but still I've seen it happen a couple of times, is that if a gym bro is really prioritizing like good, hard, solid upper body hypertrophy work, and then they go into a powerlifting program that doesn't really touch on that stuff like a lot of the popular intermediate programs do, like a lot of them are just kind of SBD variations, no real accessories. Bench is a lift that can be extremely well driven by accessory lifts and by creating hypertrophy. So if you were training with a very high hypertrophy focus with really good hard pushed accessories, and then you just take accessories and take hypertrophy focus away, it is reasonable that your bench would then start to stagnate because you're doing way less good work for it in the way that it was being built before. So if it is a standards thing, it should just come back. If you did go from doing good hard accessories to doing more of just pure bench and not a lot of accessories, you might want to bring some accessory work back in to supplement what your main bench work is doing for you. Knee pain fixes. Not knowing what's going on, I think the simplest thing that I can say is it's going to be a matter of finding a way to train your knee that creates a stimulus that will then create an adaptation that lets the knee feel better and work better. Assuming that it's like the normal patellar knee pain that a lot of lifters get, the biggest thing I'm going to want to do is get that lifter to be able to access deep knee flexion to lengthen that patellar complex and then contract their way back out and then get stronger in that position. When we're doing that, we want to make sure that our starting point is somewhere where we're able to prioritize range of motion access without making the knee feel like it totally sucks. And then once we have that starting point that we can handle, we're then going to build that up. Easy thing to do is going to be one of knees over toe guys, ATG split squats with the front foot elevated. Try to let that knee go forward, let that heel come up to really let that knee go forward, and then control your way back out. If that's too hard, you can either raise the front foot higher or support your body weight to make the movement a little bit lighter. And once you have a starting point, just get good there, then build it up, and that knee should improve. Now, there probably will be other things that you want to do, but that should at least be a decent starting point. You may have spoken about it. What got you into the sport and what's been your favorite thing? When I was 17 years old, coming off of my second shoulder surgery on this right side, I was fortunate enough to have a surgeon who told me that if I were to get stronger, my shoulder would work and feel better, and he encouraged me to start lifting and start going to a gym. Now, that kind of snowballed way out of control, and I realized I was kind of good at lifting weights, and I went all in on it, but that is what got me to where I am today. Now, my favorite thing, I think that has changed recently. And the reason I say that is if you think about, or if you've read Dave Tate's Shit, Suck, Good, Great article, he kind of talks about what is necessary to go from, beginner to kind of just sucking, and what's necessary to go from sucking to kind of to being good at the sport. And then what's necessary to go from being good at the sport to being great at the sport. And right now, like I'd say that I'm a good powerlifter. I am far from a great powerlifter. And figuring out what it is going to take to become a great powerlifter, I think that is one of the most fun things I've experienced, because what I've realized is that for myself, a lot of my problems in lifting and a lot of the mistakes I've made, they're personal development mistakes. Like they're me being immature, they're me being in a rush, they're me lacking perspective that has caused those mistakes to happen, and then trying to retrain myself psychologically to have better perspective, have better foresight, have better decision-making processes, and not get so caught up in the highs and the lows. Like figuring that out has been one of the most exciting things for me over the last couple of years, and I am stoked to see where it does pan out. Dealing with sciatica. I mean, I think the easiest answer is going to be to watch the last week's AMA video where I answered a question on sciatica, but I think the biggest thing, or the simplest thing, I'm not going to get in super deep because I answered it last week, is we want to expose that area to range of motion in the direction where we have intolerance, build up range of motion access, build up control, build up strength there, and we should gradually be able to see more tolerance to that hip working better when we want it to do things that we want it to do. Why would I make such a great shadow boxer? I think it all comes down to the lack of a real opponent. Tips for determining basic week-to-week programming progression for comp lifts. I think the easiest way to kind of figure this out is to schedule a very similar workout week after week after week, like same rep ranges, same effort ranges, and then you can just see how you progress within those effort ranges and within those rep ranges without changing variables. And once you kind of see how things progress, you can kind of figure out how things wave. Like you'll have progression, and then fatigue might catch up and you might have a regression. That can kind of help you determine when you can ramp up, when you can scale back, and it will help you determine how big of a ramp you can tolerate and how big of a scale back is going to be necessary to make sustained progress. And I will usually do something like that with every single new client I have, so we can kind of figure out how they do progress and how training should look like wave structure wise. And once we have that figured out, we can either stick with the same sort of flat loading approach, or we can start to play with variables and try to alter their rate of progression based on what we're seeing and how they are performing. And I know that was just a bunch of word soup. So I think to make it simpler, the biggest thing is really just to listen to how your body is responding to training. And if you do take a jump from 1 week to the next and it feels way too freaking hard, you probably took too big of a jump in your loading or volume. If you take a jump and it feels like it just got way too easy, you might be able to consider taking a bigger jump. But the best way to figure it out is just trial and error over time. Most overlooked movement a raw lifter using Conjugate should add to improve in any of the big three or all. Gonna go with a very non-conjugate answer here and say the main lifts, because when I see raw lifters shitting the bed on Conjugate, they are very variation heavy, they lack practice of the main lifts, and then when they have to do the main lifts on meet day, they either suck at pausing benches, they suck at hitting depth on squats, they suck at not having a box on squats, they suck at deadlifting from the floor. If they just had a little bit more main lift practice, they could probably do a lot better on the competition platform. And that kind of comes back to the whole skill idea in raw lifting versus multiply lifting. And I don't want to say that raw lifting takes more skill than multiply, but displaying the skill in multiply versus raw is very different. Like it's learning multiply gear is much harder than learning how to lift raw. Absolutely. But the thing is once you have a groove in multiply gear, you're in the gear is giving you feedback, the gear is telling you where to go, where to apply pressure. It's much easier to direct the lift when you're in the gear, and the lifts are happening much slower, so you have kind of more time to think and make adjustments as you go. Whereas raw, you don't really have any external feedback, and there isn't a whole lot of time to change or move when you hit a sticking point. So it becomes much more important to be practiced and have a very established groove raw than it is multiply. And if you're kind of just like bouncing all over the place with variations and not having a real groove, or you have a box squat groove but you don't have a free squat groove, you are going to have trouble on the platform. Ways to strengthen the adductors other than Copenhagen's. The adductors adduct, so they're going to be pulling the leg in. So when we're thinking about ways that we can pull the leg in, a Copenhagen is one of the best ways to actually train it, especially if we're doing the Copenhagen dip, where we're lowering down and pulling back up, especially if we add weight on the hip to make it harder. Other good ways, if you have access to it in that action, is going to be one of those good girl machines. And with the good girl machine, if you want to bias more adductor magnus, I like to think about leading with the foot, pulling the foot in first. If you want to bias more of the anterior adductor group, I like to think about leading with the knee and trying to pull the knee in first. Now, with that foot versus knee, adductor magnus versus anterior adductor group, the adductor magnus is a hip extensor, so it's going to help contribute to hip extension. So if we're doing any sort of hip extension, especially if it is like ultra wide and the knee kind of has to pull in as we're extending, that's going to be a lot of magnus. If we're doing really deep, really narrow work, in the very bottom of that deep, narrow work, that's also going to be a lot of magnus. Now for the anterior adductors, those guys are going to help out with hip flexion. So doing any sort of like pulling knee to chest, that's going to hit the anterior adductor group as well. So if you want to target anterior adductors, I might be thinking about trying to like roll toes in on a Copenhagen plank, or I might be trying to think about kind of doing that knee lead on a good girl machine, or I might be trying to think about pulling knee to chest. If you're trying to target more magnus, I'd be thinking about trying to push heel down on a Copenhagen plank. I'd be thinking about trying to lead the foot on a good girl machine. And I would be thinking about trying to do some like sumo work or narrow, deep squat work. and I am succumbing to brain fade, so I'm going to shut this AMA down for today. Thank you so much to everyone who asked questions and everyone who is still watching. If you got something out of this video, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and share it with a friend. And if you guys want to get more into the nitty-gritty on helping lifters navigate their way through and past injuries, hit that link below to sign up for the early bird sale on the Bridging the Gap Between Rehab and Training lecture series for strength athletes and their coaches. Whole goal of that is to give you guys the toolkit that will allow you to get past any injury, no matter what the issue is, so that you can get back to making progress.